welcome you. Thanks for taking time out to come to a workshop to learn about negotiation. So hopefully the economy is so good that you'll have to negotiate a lot, right? My name is Sanjula Williams. I'm one of the assistant directors at the Career and Professional Development Center. I do employee development for College Fine Arts and some career counseling for CFA as well. And this is?
My name is Bill Chimberg. I'm a career advisor at the CPDC. I work primarily with CIT and Dietrich College students.
Okay, so what we're going to do tonight is cover a lot of the basics. If you have some deeper questions or specific scenarios, you might want to talk with your career consultant about them. But, you know, the first thing is, you know, always negotiate. So when we think about questions to consider, the first one is it okay to negotiate? This is like a real easy one, right? Who's going to answer? Striped shirt. Is it okay to negotiate? Yes, thank you. Yes, but your success is going to depend on your negotiation skills, how prepared you are. The market conditions are also going to have an effect on the amount you can negotiate and the types of things you negotiate. But yes, it is very okay to negotiate. It's not considered rude, and you know, you want to make sure that you take the opportunity to make sure that you can increase. If you don't ask, you know, they're not going to just offer you more, okay? Second question, when is it appropriate to negotiate? Yes, thank you.
When the company is almost ready to give you an offer.
When they're almost ready to give you an offer?
Already give you.
When they already have given you an offer. Okay, so once you have secured a firm and official job offer, that's when you have negotiation power. And then how do you negotiate? Actually, that's what we're going to talk about today, so stay tuned. Today we're going to go over the different steps to the negotiation process. First one is to prepare yourself. Okay, so you want to make sure you've got the right information and tools to go in there and be confident in your negotiation. Then you also want to assess that offer that you're getting so that you know what you can compare it to and what you should be asking for. Step 3, you want to negotiate. So this is when you actually do the talking, you work on compromise, and you always want to keep it amicable. And then also the salary and benefits, you can negotiate both of those things. And then the last part is just to solidify that offer. Make sure that it's a solid offer and that it's not going to be something that's going to have question marks at the end. So first we're going to talk about the first step to prepare yourself.
So the first step is to prepare yourself for the negotiation process. The first part of that is asking yourself the big questions. When you get a job offer, you have to start thinking about what are your needs, what are your values, what are your priorities for the career that you're about to embark on. At the same time, you want to start thinking about the job market. What is the economy like at this moment? What is the specific industry that you're interested in? And if applicable, what is the company like that you're dealing with? When you're thinking about all this, you want to think of how they align, how your personal values, how your aspirations align with the job that you've been offered or the company that you might be working at. So some factors to consider, kind of the personal values, autonomy and recognition. What kind of work environment do you want to find yourself in? Do you value kind of getting your work recognized? Do you want to be answering to somebody, or do you want to have some more autonomy and kind of room for creative space? The location of the job, that's a huge factor for a lot of students that are just entering the job market. The work style and the lifestyle that you can lead in this potential job that you might be taking. At the same time, you're going to be kind of considering the work values that this job might entail, the flexibility, the stability. I know a lot of engineers at Carnegie Mellon want to work for startups. That's, you know, a different kind of animal when it comes to the stability of that type of job. Supervisory style, that has a lot to do with kind of your autonomous needs and your need for recognition, the responsibilities that you're going to be performing, and also the professional support and the development if this company or this job is going to take care of you and get you where you need to be. So we took some examples from some real companies in terms of kind of the values that you might be encountering and the differences between some of the companies that you're going to be encountering. So for a company like Deloitte with 200,000 employees, across the nation, across the world, it's an enormous company, so it has kind of a rigid corporate structure. A lot of work with Deloitte requires you to travel, to live out of hotels, etc. With that said, they have excellent benefits. They pay extremely well, and there's a lot of job security because it's such a big, successful company. For example, another example we chose is a small startup called Sparefoot. It's an online marketplace for storage containers and personal storage. It's got 60 employees, and it's kind of got that startup feel where people wear sandals to work. There's a generous vacation policy. You can take as many days off as you want. There's people playing ping pong in the office. With that said, there's only one location. It's Austin, Texas. If you're going to get a job with them, you're going to work in Austin, Texas. So those are the things that you're going to kind of be encountering, start thinking about what taking a job with a company is really going to mean for your life. You also have to ask, how much are you worth? How much are you worth in the job market and to this specific company? This depends on a lot of different kind of elements. You're going to think about your background relative to others. So you're going to think about the people entering the job market at this time, who's going to be competing for these type of positions. One thing that we're going to talk about in the future in this presentation is the Cmu Salaries and Destinations. This is going to give you a good idea of what students like you, specific to your major, your college here, what kind of jobs they're getting, what kind of salaries they're being offered, and where they're going. Then you also have to think about the state of the company's financial health, whether they're going to be able to pay you well, whether they're going to be able to kind of guarantee you a job in the long term, and then the state of the overall economy and the job market. The last thing that you kind of have to factor in is the cost of living. If you're going to have to relocate to a new city, it might be a more expensive city to live in. The act of relocating might be an expensive kind of process, and sometimes companies will pay you for that, and sometimes they won't. Some tools to help you kind of research the market. There's the kind of basic textbook online resources, LinkedIn. ONET is a great one. Alumni database. We keep track of where our alumni are finding jobs from CMU. They're great people to reach out to. And then in terms of salary, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has great sites, and then the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And then there's a couple kind of reliable cost of living calculators on the internet that we list here, one from CNN Money and one from Sperling's.
Okay, so you got the offer, right? Next step is to assess it. And, first of all, you want to think, you don't have to immediately accept the offer. I know a lot of times you're excited. It might be your first offer. Actually, I end up being like my family's unofficial career coach oftentimes, and one of my cousins that I've helped over the years, like he got this job and he just like accepted the offer, like he was so excited about it. Like, don't do that. Like, you gotta negotiate. Even if you think it's nice and good, it always doesn't hurt to ask. So, oops, did I do all that? Don't immediately, always ask for some time. We also have an offer policy. So we ask employers, we don't have any kind of stick to make them, but what we ask employers is that they give students a very fair amount of time to really consider an offer fully. You don't want, and they don't want you to make a rash decision, and then they spend money, getting you in, starting to train you, or not even doing that, and they stop their search, and that's not really what you want. You felt pressured to say yes, okay? So if you go to our policy, you'll see that the overall policy is that you should be asking, or they should be giving you at least 3 weeks to consider an offer without pressure. That means without, contacting you and seeing where you are, trying to get information about who else you're talking to. And then we have actual dates for the fall. Those are already passed, but for next year, if you guys are, continuing students, you might want to look at that. There's actual dates in the fall where they are not supposed to ask you to answer without pressure. But at any rate, 3 weeks is what we ask employers. You always want to ask the details and get it in writing. It's really hard to figure out what you're going to be doing if you don't have something to look at. You're trying to go from your memory of your phone conversation. You always want to base it on your research, and so that part we did before where you're assessing yourself, your skills, based on what the market holds and what other skills are out there. Whenever you're negotiating, you want to make sure that you're basing it on research and facts and not just kind of I want, I need, but this is what I want or I think I should have based on X, Y, Z. You should present all your issues for negotiation at the same time. You don't want to do it ad hoc, like if they don't give you this, then oh, let me try this or let me try that. Because you really want to do it based on your values and what you really want that's going to make you feel comfortable accepting that offer. And so it might seem disingenuous if you're not bringing up something the first time, but then you bring it up later because you didn't get something else. So everything that's important to you, that's a negotiation factor, you've already thought about that ahead of time. It's okay to bring that up at one time when you're negotiating. You also don't want to think about just your salary. Think of the whole package, and sometimes companies will actually put that in a numerical form, and so they'll actually say, your benefits package is worth this much. Make sure that that's clear how much that is, and they're not sneaking that in and saying that's your salary. You want to be clear what's your salary versus the benefits, but you can think about that as well. And you also want to be realistic. You don't want to ask for too much, be too pushy. You want to really beforehand think about what I need to survive, and like William was saying, have the quality of life that I would like to have and be comfortable. Okay, so when to negotiate? When you have a firm offer. There's a slight difference between salary conversation and an offer. Sometimes they'll ask you things to kind of gauge where you are to kind of see if they can afford you. That is not necessarily a firm offer. So you need to make sure that your offer is firm, that you get it in writing, and these are the types of details you want. You want to know what the breakdown is of your base salary versus benefits. If there's any bonuses, you want to know what the benefits policy is, if there's any time frame that you have to wait before you qualify to use those benefits. This sounds simple. You want to know what is my actual job title and the description of what I'm supposed to be doing. Sometimes, especially when you're doing on-campus recruiting and companies are coming in, you just kind of apply because you like the company and they do engineering. But there's so many different titles, and sometimes they juggle people around. Like, if you're not fitting for this team, maybe they'll suggest you for a different team. And so you want to make sure you're clear on what actual job I'm going to be doing, okay? You also negotiate when you're serious about the offer. So you don't want to just negotiate with every single company that offers you a position. If you wouldn't seriously consider going and working for that company, then you don't want to have that recruiter or that person kind of working on your benefit to try and get you additional things if you're not really seriously going to take that offer. And it's also kind of unethical to just play them off each other. So you try to get this company to go up some so that you can tell another company, well, this company came up this much, what can you do? Okay. Now you certainly can use leverage if you have other offers, but you don't want to build up one falsely if you're not really interested in it. When you're clear on what's important to you. So you don't want to just start this and not really have that sense of what I really want ultimately. And we're going to talk about a sheet that you can work out some things on that for. Ultimately, if you have other offers, you don't have to wait till you have other offers, but it's really good if you do have other offers, you're able to kind of sometimes speed up a company that you really want. Say, oh, I got an offer from company X, and speed up the process with another company, or you might get, more from another company because they know you're a hot commodity and someone else wants you. So you certainly can. And don't feel that you have to disclose all the information about who else you're interviewing with, how much they're offering. You're perfectly within your right to say that that's information that I don't share. And you always put it back on them. What do you think is a fair offer for someone in this position with my level of experience? Okay? And then always before you accept the offer. So you have this kind of chart of leverage. Your leverage is like, low, right, before the offer. You're in negotiation. Then you get the offer. It skyrockets. It's high. That's when it's the highest. Okay, so this is when you want to actually negotiate. Once you say yes, your leverage is gone. So you can't say, oh, after the fact, I've already said yes, but then now I want to try and negotiate something. Typically, that doesn't work. Sometimes people can negotiate down the road, like once they've been an employee and they've shown themselves, but that initial negotiation is really very important. So don't say yes until you're ready. Now, other thing is you want time to consider the offer. I talked about our offer policy, and you can refer employers to that. If they're, giving you short deadlines, you can, show them our offer policy. It's available online. You can get the help of your career consultant to contact the employer on your behalf if they're being a little bit more obstinate. But I always feel like that's probably the first thing that you want to ask for is time to consider the offer. And that's kind of separate from your true negotiation. I would always ask for the longest amount of time that you can because they're going to probably shorten it anyway. And definitely if you have a milestone on campus, like for example, the EOC is coming up for my students. We got the CAOC in February. If you're getting an offer now, you might want to wait until after you've done that big event and had some time for those opportunities to go through the cycle before you're saying yes to anybody. Because really, you don't really have a lot to compare them to if you only have one offer on the table. You can't compare that offer to something else to see which one would be a better fit. So sometimes having other offers is better. And then you can also ask, can I give you my offer on and say a specific time or date? So you might say a month, like for technical people, maybe end of February or middle of March. They understand when they're recruiting on campus that it's a different time frame than normal and that you won't even be available to work until after school is out. So they do have some flexibility because they do understand that. Now you want to think of some pros and cons. And if you got all the handouts, there's a chart on there. This is a handout that's going to help you to be able to evaluate your offers. Even if you just have one offer, you can still put the information about that offer in this chart to kind of see, how full it is and where it fits with each of these criteria. There's some space at the end and maybe you can put some things that are important to you, like maybe some work values and kind of rate this company against that. You might want to work with a small versus mid-sized company. You might want to be in a certain city. And so you can put all that information and kind of have a thinking man's chart way of looking at it and saying, oh, okay, this one seems to fit most of the things I'm looking for and most of the values that I want. Ultimately, though, you should go with your gut. So even if one company just doesn't look the best on paper, but your heart is really telling you that's where you want to be, and it's the type of work you really want to do, you want to consider that too because you're not getting a life sentence. It's going to be your first post-CMU experience, or it could be an internship, but it's not a life sentence. So you want to think about, your progression and how that particular experience is going to go on and propel your career. So we already kind of talked about that, and that's just an example. Now we're going to talk about actually the negotiation process.
So a question that comes up a lot for the actual negotiation process is whether to kind of initiate it by email or initiate it by phone. Chances are by the time you get a job offer, you've been contacted by phone or you've interfaced with a recruiter or the employer by phone. So the question is whether you should really kind of do it by email or do it by phone. And the answer is it really depends on your own style. So for email, there's a couple benefits where it provides kind of an electronic record of the negotiation. So you have kind of the terms that you've been talking about in the email. It's right there. You kind of basically have proof. Another kind of benefit is it's less on the spot. If you feel a little uncomfortable or awkward doing these types of negotiations, you can kind of calculate or formulate what you want to say it, and then just give them time to respond. At the same time, it's less direct because you're not having an immediate back and forth with the employer. So you risk giving the employer time to kind of calculate their next move or kind of sidestep the whole negotiation process in general. So by phone, the benefit of doing this by phone is you can kind of communicate how you feel or the tone of your message more effectively because you're just literally speaking to them on the phone. You can tell them how excited you are about the position and that you really appreciate the opportunity. You just kind of want to talk about the salary a little more. Like I said, it's a little more direct. It's back and forth. But at the same time, there's no firm record of it. It's just this conversation that you're having with this person. So those are kind of some of the positive and negative aspects for both. Now, with that said, the first kind of step in initiating kind of the negotiation is your first move. So these are just kind of some phrases that are good to kind of open up the floor to negotiation, where you either do this by email or do this over the phone, where you contact them and you say something like, I'm very interested in your company. I really appreciate the job offer. I wanted to know if there's any flexibility in the offer. Another way of saying that is the offer firm or negotiable? Or just, I would like to just discuss the salary of the position. These are all kind of pretty suitable ways of initiating the negotiation. The employers that you're dealing with have been through this before. They know what this means. So you kind of stop and let them respond. So, and this is not working. Could you just go to the next one? This isn't. So based on the employer's compensation guidelines, which are kind of internal rules that govern what they can offer entry-level or new hires, they may or may not be able to negotiate a higher salary for you. With that said, there's still the possibility of increasing your compensation through negotiating more benefits. So there's a huge kind of range of what you might be able to negotiate or get out of a potential employer. This includes kind of the start date. This is a big thing, especially for students who are just graduating and they're not sure, the timeline of everything, and they planned a family trip, or a trip to celebrate their graduation. That's one thing that students commonly kind of negotiate with their potential employers. Along those lines, kind of parking or commuting costs, you might get, mileage compensation or gas compensation. Accelerated review, maybe the company normally kind of puts their employees up for review every 12 months. You might negotiate getting an accelerated review for after 6 months of you being there. A signing bonus or a relocation bonus, that's another big asset, especially if you're moving across the country to maybe California or the West Coast. Stock options, if it's a small young company, you might be able to negotiate a share in the company. And then special circumstances, like I said, kind of pre-scheduled vacations and everything. And the one thing that's also important to mention is education reimbursement. A lot of big companies will sometimes pay for their employees to get an MBA or a master's degree. You can discuss that in your negotiation and figure out if that's something that you can kind of get from them.
And I will say the parking and commuting costs, myself, when I came to CMU, if I had have thought of that, because it's over $1,000 a year to park at CMU, I probably would have tried to negotiate that into my salary. So if you are somewhere that's not kind of mobile, where there's a lot of public transportation, that's definitely something you might want to think about.
So what's going to inevitably come up from this is the employer's compensation guidelines. Like I said, most companies have kind of an internal set of rules of how they dictate what they pay their employees, especially new hires. So there's a bunch of different ways, and there's not one kind of firm system throughout, but companies generally fall into one of three categories when it comes to how they build their compensation kind of systems. So the first is the fixed offer. So this type of company will basically say that they have their own people who research the job market, they research the competition, and they come up with a figure, and that's what they offer to their entry-level or new hires. And that's basically it. So in the event that you kind of encounter this in a negotiation, that's basically the end. You just say, thank you for, the offer. I'm going to take some time to, think about this, and I'll get back to you, when I've made a decision. So this is the first kind of system that you might encounter.
Another type you might encounter, and this one is very popular, it's called a pay grade system. So within that system, they have different grades, and they might be, acronyms, G1, G2, and each of those corresponds to a different range of salary. And typically that goes along the lines of your level of responsibility, or it could be like, requirements such as, a degree versus, a position that's non-degreed. And so they can negotiate within that range. Sometimes you can find out if employers have that type of system, and you can find out what that position is already graded, and so you kind of have an idea of the range already. You can also just research pay grades on the website and through alumni connections and find out, well, what is a typical range, or how does this company tend to operate in terms of their pay grades. And it's not always totally set in stone. The only way for them to go outside of that range of a pay grade would be for them to upgrade your position to a higher level. That can happen. I don't know if it happens tons at the entry level. Let's say you're a master's student, you come in with experience, and there might be a position that they have listed at a lower level. You might negotiate or try and see if they could bump that up, and that might be something that'll make it a little bit more of a better offer for you. And then the last type is the negotiator. Like this type is like really the wheeling dealing type of company. There's no set guidelines or policies. They really will be willing to work with you. And there's not as much red tape in terms of them being able to offer you additional things. Sometimes this is probably less and less you're going to be seeing companies that have this like total freedom, but it is still out there. And so you want to make sure that you're getting a fair offer. Definitely do your research, because you don't want to be the one that didn't, and then you get a salary that's maybe even $5,000 lower, and has several things that you didn't, that someone else got with the same position, because that could happen with this type. The things aren't as set. So really somebody can kind of make their own package. So you really want to make sure that you do your research with this type of organization so you know what to ask for. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how you do it, because this can be an awkward process. I mean, the whole job search thing, I think, is kind of an uncomfortable thing. You feel like you're on, display, and they're judging you in some way. And so then you're like, okay, now I have to negotiate and ask for more than what they are offering me. And so sometimes if you have kind of a script or something to say in mind, that will help you get through that process. You might get an employer that when you just bring up that open-ended question, is there any flexibility in the offer? They might say, oh, it may be negotiable. So they'll ask you then, what do you have in mind? What you want to do is do kind of a sandwich approach. How many of you heard the sandwich approach, like when you're giving people feedback that might be a little harsh? Yeah, you have? Okay. Well, you can use that same type of approach with the employer. Okay. So first you want to start out, really reiterating your interest in the organization in that position, because remember, you're negotiating with the company that you really want, right? So I'm really very interested in this position. Summarize again how your background and things are really going to be a benefit and add value to that organization. And then you want to outline all your negotiation points. You want what? More salary based on what? Geographic location, cost of living. You want more benefits based on, you know, what? You know, more vacation time. Perhaps, you know, if you are someone, especially a grad student who's worked in the industry before, you might have a history where you've had maybe already 3 weeks of vacation, and this package that they're offering you only has 2. Well, you can say, you know, based on the fact that I've had this before, you know, would you be willing to be able to come up, you know, with at least 3 weeks of vacation? And then finally, thank them, express interest in working with them, and that you are confident that you can come up with a mutually agreeable package. Because that's what it's about. You want a win-win for both of you. You want to be able to have the type of thing that you've gone to CMU and spent a lot of money for, right? And they want to have a good employee. And you both want to be happy. No one wants to be having ill feelings through this process. So make sure that you reiterate that you know, you're excited about this and you're sure that you can come to a great decision or a great package for that'll be good for the both of you. Here's an example of it in motion. You might say, I'm really excited to work here, and I believe my needs and skills, and you be more specific, will be a good fit. And I know I'd bring a lot of value. I appreciate your offer at $80,000, but I was really expecting to be more in the $85,000 to $95,000 range. Based on my experience, drive, talent, and the market and location, can we look at a salary range of, you know, 90 to 92 for this position? Or, you know, whatever range you have. You always want to give a range. You don't want to give just one salary. And whatever range you give, never give a bottom number lower than what you're willing to take. Because a lot of times they'll go after that bottom number. So the bottom number you have to be okay with. Another thing you can say is, I feel, you know, that this is the range I've researched, and based on XYZ, I feel like I should be where? In the top of that range or in the middle of that range. You kind of can give them some suggestions there. Next, you want to make sure that you end the negotiation positively. They're either going to have the power to actually make, you know, different kind of negotiation strategies with you, or a lot of times they'll actually have to go back and speak with the hiring manager who may have a budget that they have to work within, okay? And so that hiring manager has to be able to say, okay, this is what I can, you know, give out of my budget, this is where I can go. So not always the person that you're talking to, that recruiter, they don't always have the power to actually give you more or less, okay? And so give them time to go and find out the information, and they'll get back with you. And once they get back with you with the new information, then you still need time to evaluate that, you know, and then give your offer based on the new. And you should always get what? A new agreement in writing before you say yes. You want to thank them and reiterate your optimism. And again, keep it very positive that, you know, you think this is really going to be a good outcome for you. And you're really trying to meet in the middle. Last step, solidifying the offer.
So once you kind of come to an end of the negotiation phase and you decide that you want to take this job, you know, accept the offer, you ask for a letter of employment. Most of the time they're kind of a step ahead of you on that. They have those things ready. This is just you getting it in writing. The two things that you want out of a letter of employment is outlining kind of the job and the duties that you're going to have, so that there's no kind of miscommunication or misunderstanding about that, and then the salary and the benefits that you agreed upon. This just kind of helps avoid confusion, avoids kind of undesirable situations where you take a job and then they kind of move the goalposts on you. And then this kind of step is extremely important if you went through the negotiation process and the final kind of package that you have is significantly different than the package that you were initially offered. Once you get this, you kind of sign it. Sometimes it's done electronically, sometimes it's done through snail mail. You submit it and that's it. So you accept a job, and then kind of what we tell our students, you know, in any circumstances, once you accept a job offer, that's, you know, you accept that offer and you inform any other potential employers that you have been interviewing with that you've accepted an offer, and that's it.
And you can also submit a formal letter of acceptance outlining yourself, what you believe were the things that you agreed upon. Very important, because sometimes there's that disconnect with the processes. You know, they have like form letters and things. I know I had this one student once where they were like, okay, we discussed all this information and they agreed, and then when I get the offer, it's nothing like we talked about. Well, you know, the person that they were working with just accidentally sent their kind of boilerplate instead of updating it with what they actually negotiated on. So definitely, you know, that written and then your written acceptance, that's the sticking point. So try to avoid giving verbal affirmations. You can say you're interested and everything, but don't say yes until your yes is going to be in form of writing, okay? And then a final word. It never hurts to introduce the topic of negotiation. Because if they were willing to go up and you didn't ask, you're going to be, you know, doing yourself a disservice. And there's a book called Women Don't Ask by Susan Rowan. Well, not Susan Rowan. Anyway, she actually is a CMU professor that wrote this, and then she did a second book called Ask for It that goes more into how you do that. But statistics have shown, like, especially with women, we tend to not want to ask for things more, and so they show the difference in salary over a lifetime of someone who negotiated versus someone who didn't. And it's a lot of money when you go incrementally year after year with bonuses and increases in your salary. So getting a higher bump at the very beginning that increase goes for however many years. Versus, you know, I would do that over getting like a lump sum one time. I would rather have an increase that's going to continue each year. Again, remember, you only negotiate with the company that you really want to work with. And just be cautious. You might be negotiating with your supervisor. It's not always that middleman, that recruiter. Sometimes it's going to be the person who's going to be your boss. So you always want to make it amicable and never, you know, make them uncomfortable during the situation, and really just try to make it a win-win. And so we do have a lot of other information on our website, like William was saying before. You can go and look at what actual Carnegie Mellon students have gotten in terms of salary, what companies, what geographic locations, and salary ranges. So you can do a lot of research that way. And any questions?
Well, enough these students have applied for a couple of experienced professional openings. Sometimes when you apply, it says whether there's going to be relocation assistance or not. Do you still negotiate it, even if it said no, try to make it a yes, or should you just
I would still ask for that. Again, sometimes they put things in there that are kind of a standard. I was in a search once, and I was actually on the other side. You know, we were looking for someone, and this is true with job descriptions too. It's always the ideal, right? And so we got so caught up in the ideal, it ended up being a failed search. Well, then this one person came in and she was like, I'm going to be here. I'm willing to volunteer. When we went back and looked at her, we were like, this is a great candidate. You know, so a lot of times the things that they put on there is kind of like the ideal, or they're like boilerplate standard. And that's what he was saying before, is if you negotiate something that's different than the policy or what everybody else gets, then that's definitely when you want to get it in writing. But you still can ask. You know, they can tell you no, but at least you ask, right? Good question. Anything else? Oh, you and then.
So sometimes when you apply to companies online, they usually have this option where you can specify the salary range that you expect to be. So do you need to do your salary research before you apply, or is it something that is flexible, or do they go by it very seriously?
You should do your salary research before you apply in that situation, if they will not let you put like NA or leave it blank. Because ultimately, really in this, you really want them to come up with a number first. So if you don't want to pigeonhole yourself, and if it doesn't allow you to do a range and it's saying, you know, what salary do you want, that's kind of pigeonholing you. So if you can not answer that question during the application process, that's probably going to be the best, because if they look at your, you know, talent, skills, and what you bring to the table, that's going to come up later. You know, they're going to still evaluate you based on that.
So I have a question for negotiating location. For me, I'm a senior, best graduate looking for a career in South Florida specifically. And so since I have a restriction by location, if I'm looking at firms, I'm an engineer, and if I'm looking at firms that say nationwide, how do you start at the beginning saying that you have this restriction to a certain area, even after the job has been offered? How do you talk about, for example, if it's further away from where you initially wanted to?
Yeah, I think in that situation, you definitely want to do your research beforehand. And so if it says nationwide, that doesn't necessarily mean that they really have a thing in every city. So you got to do your research and say, okay, do they have a subsidiary or an office close enough where I could live and commute or work? The other thing you also want to consider is not all functions happen in every location. You know, so there might be certain types of functions that happen at one location versus another. And so based on what you're wanting to do, that might put you in a location. So you also want to know that before you go in, because you don't want to waste your time or the employers. If at the end of the day, like, you get this offer and then it's like, oh, like, I have to be in Florida and, like, there's no way, you know. You want to make sure that you don't get into that situation. But negotiating location, there's a lot of times where companies, especially when they come to campus, they're open to kind of forwarding you to other offices. The tricky thing, even about a lot of large companies, like even say at Google, is a lot of times the teams that are hiring, they kind of hire independently. And so you could be talking to a recruiter from one area and they not in another area know nothing about you. You know, and so if you're interested in another area and it's another team that's in that area, then what you want to do is let them know, and they'll forward, you know, your information to that team. You can ask, you know, about, you know, well, can I change locations or teams? Like, and if you can't do it right away, like, is there a time frame where you can do that within? Because sometimes they'll allow you to change, but you have to be at that location initially for maybe 6 months or something like that. And then you have to decide what you can do, you know, what you can handle. But I would do all that kind of digging beforehand. And we do have a lot of resources that can help you find companies in, like, a particular geographic area. If you go to our website, to the Jobs and Internships page, there's a lot of resources that are databases where you can just find companies in a certain industry in a city. And that can be your starting point for your research. Any other questions?
Going off of the question earlier, I'm applying for jobs right now, and a lot of the employers won't consider your application unless you name a salary. I was wondering if there's like a protocol for after you do the research and you find an average, how much above that are you supposed to request? Or
that's a good, because you don't want to price yourself out of the market, but you don't want to undersell yourself either. There's a general rule, I don't know about rules for like the initial, a general rule for like when you're transitioning from like one position to another is that it's probably not worth it if you're not getting at least a 10% increase. And so you might want to apply that same type of thinking to the salary that you put on the paper. You know, that if it's 10% like above, you know, where you ultimately want to be, you know, then you're probably in that, within that cushion. But if you can put NA, I would put NA, and then like deal with that later.
Yeah, I've been researching that as well, and I see that there are differences in like experience that students have, as well as you know, specifics, whether it's a civil engineer, structural, architectural, and so there's a variation of like at least $3,000, and depending on which company. So like, how do you put a range? Is a range good?
Yeah, I would definitely do a range if you have the ability to put a range.
But like within a range, like is $10,000 range or $15,000 or $20,000?
I would say maybe between a $5,000 to $7,000 range. You know, again, you don't want to, you know, be out in the sky. You don't want to be too low. And again, don't suggest anything lower than what you were comfortable with taking. And then it's okay to say, this is a range I'm comfortable with, but I think based on XYZ, I should fall within the top of that range, or the middle of that range, and kind of suggest that to them. The other thing is, and this is maybe outside the scope of this, but you know, when you're applying and you're applying online and that salary thing comes up, it's going to come up because that's a form. So I would really try to not totally rely on applying through that means, but really using your networking to try and find a actual inside way to get your resume and to apply. That's going to help you so much with your follow-up too, because if you have someone that you've submitted it to, then you know who to follow up with. Okay, and once you're in a job search, it's within your right every 2 to 3 weeks to follow up to find out where you stand in the process. But if it's to who it may concern, or you know, robo recruiter, you're not going to be able to really do that. So sometimes it takes a little extra digging to find out, you know, who is the hiring manager, or you know, who's the hiring manager I should address my cover letter to. This is kind of like maybe a little sneaky way to find out who it is. You don't have to know their email, even if you just know their name. Once you have the name and you know the company, they have a phone number. You can ask for them, right? So.
Now, say that you have like 2 offers and one of them is significantly higher than the other. Can you just say, hey, I have an offer that's like, say, 10%, 20% better?
Yes.
I mean, can you do this kind of comparison, or can you just say, hey, I'm thinking about this range, and you just talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, you can do whatever you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with getting the exact amount that you've been offered, but a range, but letting them know that you have an offer from a competitive company that's higher or better in some way, is certainly a strategy that you can utilize in your negotiation process.
Corollary to that, is it appropriate to name drop the other company?
You can do that. Now, here's the thing. You don't have to give a name. Like sometimes employers, they will want to know, like, you know, who are you interviewing with, you know? And so that's up to you, how comfortable you are with saying, you know, who else is kind of on your radar, or who you gotten offers from. If you're comfortable with that, and you think that's a strategy that's going to maybe get them to perk up, then certainly you're within your rights to utilize that and let them know. But again, if you're not comfortable with it, don't feel pressured to tell all that information. And if you are pressured, then you might want to think, you know, well, you know, everything, the whole process also is giving you cues into how that organization works, right? You know, just like in the interview when they were doing that, was it shoulder surfing, when they were wanting people to log into their social media and all that stuff. If a company does that, you know, you got to think about the cultural values and things of that company. And do I want to say, yeah, you can look at my Facebook? You know, even if you have something higher, you don't. But if a company is wanting to do that, you got to think about, you know, is that the type of company that I even want to work for that's that invasive? Now, y'all should all know not to put anything crazy on the internet. That's a whole nother workshop. But yeah, you can name drop if you are comfortable with that.